This is TWiT.
There is an app that millions have downloaded called ToTok, not TikTok, TOTOK. It's a messaging app that has built-in video and voice calling. A New York Times investigation, as well as a intelligence assessment from the U.S. intelligence community, discovered that it's actually a spy tool. It's used by a government, the United Arab Emirates, and can track every conversation, every movement, every relationship, every appointment, every sound, every image of people who install it in their phones. It was only put out a few months ago. Millions of downloads on the Apple and Google app stores, not just by people in the UAE, but by people all over the world. I'm sure that if the UAE created it with that intent, it was really to spy on people in the UAE as opposed to people in the U.S., but who knows? It was one of the most downloaded social apps in the U.S. last week. Apple has pulled it off the App Store, so has Google. Talk about stuff you don't want in your house, Lori.
But then pulling that off the App Store doesn't actually get it off people's phones, though, right? So the message it needs to be sent out to everyone who downloaded it too. Yeah, that's kind of scary. That's every time a new social service comes out, that's kind of the fear that you walk into is this something I can trust? And a lot of times it's fine, and there's nobody in the background trying to steal any information, even though you have to give access to a keyboard or you have to allow them to use your camera or something like that. But when something like this comes up, it definitely scares me and reminds me that we're giving away a lot when we even, to known services that are not nefarious, like that they have the ability to access that as soon as we agree to it, and they're not using it. But who's to say that that's not going to change someday? That's where I have a lot of that kind of fear, that future fear of, Big Brother watching, of like right now they're not doing it, but they can do it because we gave them permission to, because we had to in order to use it.
There was this chilling video this week too of someone in China being interrogated, like basically chained to this giant metal bathtub overcoat thing, and they were saying, why did you complain about the police taking motorcycles? We saw you on WeChat. We know that you complained about it. And he's like, oh, I'm drunk. He goes, oh, drunk is your excuse. You should apologize. And they had his entire everything about him, and they knew everything, where he was, when he was, and he had to like tape an apology to everybody. And it was just, we're always just a couple steps away from that, and you never really know what's going to happen until it does.
Yeah, and these are all going to become more of national politics issues. Department of Defense just last week advised everybody in the Department of Defense, if you have the TikTok app installed in your phone, remove it right now. And if you haven't installed it yet, don't install it in the future, because there's still the security agencies are still trying to figure out, is TikTok really a piece of spyware? Is there anything? Is the Chinese government using it as a potential surveillance tool? Or is it just simply a potential that because it's an app on a phone, just like any country could put any country's programmers could write any app for any phone, you could use that to figure out where people are where users are located, how they're moving. And this is not about China. This is not about Turkey. This is not about specific countries. This is a threat to pretty much any citizen who has a phone in their pocket. If New York Times did that wonderful piece that, first part of a series of articles a few days ago that really just explained that you don't need to have a totalitarian government that is infecting every phone with a piece of mandatory government-created spyware. You can just simply buy information from companies that are legally scraping it from all of our movements. They decided to see how far they could track just individuals, people in the military, people who work in Washington, people who work in government, and they're just leaving so many breadcrumbs behind simply by virtue of the fact that, like everybody, you have a phone with you. That it's ridiculous. It's not really. I don't fear if the totalitarian the totalness of the danger is not by malicious governments. It really is by industries and companies that have absolutely no laws preventing them from doing whatever they want to do.
Well, get ready.
We got a warning about the Canadian border because for some reason, they've granted America like absolute rights inside of Canada. So if you're in an airport, you can no longer decide not to go to America. You can no longer leave. They can arrest you. They can detain you. They can go through your Twitter, go through your Facebook. And there's like low-key panic about like just crossing into the U.S. border now, which used to be the friendliest, longest, most unprotected border in the world. And the world changes like that.
Going into Canada has always been tough. So it goes both ways.
But you used to be able to leave, and now they're trying to stop you. Like if you're an American and you were going into Canada or vice versa, you could say, I changed my mind, I'm not going in, and they had to let you go. And that's apparently no longer true. More,
yeah. Here's another scary point of information. According to the New York Times, they hired Patrick Wardle, who's great. In fact, remember that name because my pick of the week this week comes from Patrick Wardle. He's a former NSA hacker. He's a private security researcher. He also writes great Mac software. And he did a forensic analysis of ToTok, and guess what? It's basically a copy of a Chinese messaging app called YeCall, slightly customized for English and Arabic audiences. So they didn't even have to write a custom app. They could take an existing app offered by a Chinese company, modify it slightly, and put it out. So I wonder, can you still download YeCall? This is a really interesting issue. I mean, we are carrying in our pockets with our smartphones an amazing surveillance device. And if you look at the amount of information that ToTok collected, it's everything.
I keep trying to figure out ways in which I can get by throughout the days, particularly if I'm not outside, if I'm leaving my house, and not have my phone actually turned on. I've been thinking about, for other reasons, buying a lossless MP3 player, lossless digital audio player, for a lot of reasons, but now that's another reason. Like, well, if I had a separate device that doesn't have Wi-Fi, doesn't have Bluetooth, doesn't have a cellular chip, and it's just there to play 200 gigabytes of my music, that means that if I'm really going all over the place today, I can turn off my phone and only turn it back on again when I'm at like a really big public place, because it's hard to come up with an opinion that doesn't sound completely paranoid, and B, isn't actually a really smart thing to think about, because it really is that bad. This, again, I say, with no regulations whatsoever, no one will ever go to jail for tracking the vice president via his phone, no matter where he goes. It is the responsibility of the people around him to shut down cell service and shut down cell towers. And even then, all you have to do is have someone with a Wi-Fi. Anyway, there's no laws against doing whatever you want with whatever you can get throughout the air. And that is terrible.
There is one positive note on this story, which is that this is a relatively recent app, and they got caught right away. And I think that points to the fact that people are much more aware than they used to be, and there are a lot of people looking at apps to see what's exfiltrated. And so it's encouraging to me that they got caught.
But the TikTok adoption rate was astronomical before anyone even really talked about it.
Yeah, ToTok, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, but TikTok is still a phenomenon, and people had never really had that discussion until much later.
I got to presume that Patrick Wardle and others and the CIA are paying attention to TikTok as well, and if it exfiltrated all that information, that we would know about it. By the way, ByteDance, the parent company, is looking for headquarters outside of China because of this scrutiny. They don't want to be perceived as a Chinese company. So they still will be, and they still would be beholden to China, but they'd like to move their world headquarters out of China, I guess.
Yeah. Imagine how frustrated the Attorney General's office and law enforcement in the United States are, where they're having to fight tooth and nail and have this multi-year-long strategy just to have the ability to request through a court access to encrypted data on a phone. And meanwhile, they see across the ocean, here are governments that are actually putting regular surveillance apps into play. Here are governments that are actually putting requirements that you have to have this app installed. You can't have new rules that say that if you buy a phone within our territorial borders, it has to come pre-installed with Russian-made apps. And it's like, but we know this person is doing evil things and hurting people. We have his phone, and you're telling me that we can't get into the encrypted contents of this. Meanwhile, in this other, And that this is why they want that kind of power, because it really is powerful stuff. Whether you are on the side of the angels, again, trying to keep people safe and solve horrifying crimes, or if you are just simply saying, hey, you know what? It would really make things easier for us if everybody was required to use an app that tracks their location and looks at everything that they type in with the keyboard for certain key phrases and sends transcripts to us on a minute by minute basis. Wouldn't that be convenient for us?